Welcome to our GNCC Espresso Live, focused on the vital topic of the importance of a living wage for organizations. As we connect here, and for those who tune in at a later point, we recognize the significance of this discussion and how it can shape our workforce and our economy, as well as our community at the same time. A living wage is more than a concept. It's a principle that ensures fair compensation for employees while fostering economic and social stability. Throughout this webinar, we will delve into the compelling reasons on why businesses could embrace the concept of a living wage and the impact it can have on both employees and businesses alike. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, this webinar will equip you with the knowledge and tools to steer your business and with that, your community towards prosperity. I'm Mishka Balsam, and I will serve as your moderator for this session. Today's webinar is powered by Living Wage Niagara and Penn Financial. The Living Wage program is an Ontario-wide program established by the Ontario Living Wage Network, now administered by United Way Niagara and funded through Niagara Prosperity Initiative. And Penn Financial is has a truly local commitment in the heart and soul of everything that Penn philosophy is and what they do. They believe that the prosperity of their members and their communities go hand in hand, and they're always looking at businesses as a force of good to work together, to strengthen the communities. As a values-driven financial cooperative, they work to help their members and communities thrive. In 2023, we were really fortunate to partner with Penn Financial to launch a joint ESG initiative, environmental, social, and governance framework and resources that are tools that so many of you have tapped into to ensure that investors, staff, and stakeholders are living up to their commitment and to making sure that they're actually really practicing and the promises that they're giving at the same time. And it is my great pleasure to have with us Carrie Old, Chief Marketing Officer at Penn Financial.
Super, thank you so much, Mishka. So as you pointed out, really at the heart of our philosophy is doing business for good. We believe here that mindset is important for businesses in today's global landscape, and there's several compelling reasons for that. So firstly, embracing ESG practices fosters long-term sustainability by minimizing environmental impact, promoting ethical labor practices, and ensuring transparent governance structures. By integrating environmental concerns into operations, such as reducing carbon emissions and managing resource consumption, companies can mitigate risks associated with climate change while also positioning themselves as responsible stewards of the planet. Socially responsible practices, including fostering diversity and inclusion, supporting our local communities, and ensuring fair labor standards not only enhance corporate reputation, but they also cultivate positive relationships with stakeholders, consumers, and employees. Moreover, businesses that are committed to strong government practices uphold integrity, accountability, and ethical conduct. All of these are fundamental pillars of trust and credibility in the marketplace. We also know that regulatory bodies and industry standards are evolving to incorporate ESG criteria, making adoption to these practices not only a moral imperative, but also a legal requirement in many jurisdictions. A strong strategy can also support attracting and retaining employees. Increasingly, we also know that embracing ESG principles is linked to financial performance and resilience. So a lot of reasons here, but these are just some of the reasons why investors in financial institutions like Penn Financial are placing greater emphasis on ESG metrics when making important decisions. At Penn, we have a robust plan to address these important topics as part of our truly local commitment. It's really ingrained in everything we do, and it's a big part of our corporate values. Some examples of this: we hold ourselves to an uncompromising standard of giving back, whether that's through charitable investments into our community, being a B Corp certified company, providing socially responsible investment options for our members, or simply by offering our community room at our 4th Avenue branch for use by local not-for-profits. We're also really proud to be one of the first financial institutions in Niagara to be recognized as a living wage employer by the Ontario Living Wage Network. So today's topic is very near and dear to our hearts. As part of our commitment to sustainability, we also chose to use 100% renewable energy for all of our locations through our partnership with Bullfrog Power. So there's a lot of work we can all do to work towards a more sustainable and just future for everyone, and it can definitely seem overwhelming. For Penn Financial, the key was to select a few areas to focus on, and each year we build more momentum from there. I really hope everyone enjoys today's dialogue and hope it provides you some inspiration as well.
Yeah, thank you so very much. I really appreciate your support of this one, but above all, in addition to this webinar that you're supporting, all the things that you and your organization is actually doing in Niagara, for Niagarans, for the community, and at the same time and how you're supporting your employees and members. So thank you for everything. It's really appreciated. And now it is my great honor actually to introduce our esteemed panelists who are actually here to hopefully answer all the questions that you have already shared with us and that you have brought forward. With us, we have from the Living Wage, the program coordinator and is Aima Khan. She is the Living Wage program coordinator with United Way Niagara. This program aims to address poverty through corporate social responsibility. Providing a living wage is an important policy lever that can help lift Niagara residents out of poverty and provide them with basic economic security and opportunities for social inclusion. That is the foundation of this program. Aima, thank you very much for being with us. And thank you. Our next panelist is Dr. Adnan Pibai, who is a local ophthalmologist who has been a living wage employer since 2019. He is the co-founder of Niagara Eye Care Center and on staff at Niagara Health and holds academic appointment at McMaster's University. He's also the co-founder of Dispatch Restaurant in St. Catharines, which is also a living wage business, and was the first full-service restaurant in Ontario to be certified as such when it was founded in 2019. Thank you very much for being with us, Adnan. And we also have with us Fred Frugedevin. He is the general manager at Niagara Pallet and Recyclers Ltd., a family-run business for over 30 years, a leading manufacturer, seller, and recycler of pallets and shipping materials, and most importantly, a living wage employer. So Fred, Adnan and Aima, thank you so very much for being with us. And my same thanks go to everyone who's actually has joined us here and has for the interest of what this topic can maybe bring to your organization and move all of Niagara forward at the same time. Just to let you know about today's format, it's a really interactive one. We really encourage you to utilize the chat function, which is at the bottom of your screen, and ask any questions that come to mind related to the living wage. And we are really committed to answering all of them in the given time that we have here, this hour that we are going to be together. Please know that this is also, you have the ability to enable live transcript. It's available on your screen, and this session is recorded. If you have any or experience any technical problems, please just let us know in the chat function, and we will look for that, and someone will get in touch with you. All right, so I'm wondering, is everyone ready for this one? Okay. If I could, maybe I thought about this, and I thought maybe the best way to start out is with Aima, if that's all right. And I thought maybe we need to lay a foundation. What exactly is a living wage and how it differs from the minimum wage? And this was one of the questions that often in conversations people are bringing up. And Aima, if I can maybe pass it on to you, and maybe if you want to take this first one, and then we can move through some other ones that have come forward.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mishka. So when we say living wage, what we're talking about is the hourly wage that is needed to meet the most basic necessities for individuals to participate in their particular community, in their particular region. So this is not just cost of essentials, but also we include things like social participation in that community. The minimum wage, as we know, is the same across the province, but living wage reflects what people need to earn to cover the actual cost of living in the community that they live in. Minimum wage is mandatory for most occupations. That's kind of the starting point. While living wage is a voluntary commitment from the employer, it goes beyond the minimum standard, and it looks towards paying enough for employees to cover their expenses so that they can fully participate in their community. For years, minimum wage has been way too low to even lift some full-time, full-year working individuals out of poverty. And the living wage is based on the principle that if you're working full-time, you should be able to cover those costs and you should be able to participate in your community.
Thank you very much. One of the questions that had come forward when we had promoted this webinar was what factors are taken into consideration to determine the living wage? And does each community across Canada or North America calculate it the same way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So our living wage, like I mentioned, it does take into account those basic necessities that individuals need, that families need. So we take into account the cost of food, shelter, clothing, internet, phone bills, childcare, hydro, transportation, even things like household items like cleaning supplies. And there's also a section in there that covers modest recreation. So that could be something like spending money on a birthday or going camping at a provincial park or attending a community event. So these are kind of some of the costs that we consider when calculating that living wage. And although we're pulling data from some of the same data sources, it is different in every region. We know that transportation can vary from one city to another. So those things are definitely taken into account when we calculate the living wage for each region.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And if I can ask you one more question just before passing it on to Fred and Adnan as well, is the question, if we're looking at living wage 5 years ago, in 2019, for example, maybe going on into early 2020, and comparing it to 2023, 2024, what is today's living wage versus what was it at that time?
That's a good question. Right off the top of my head, I don't remember the 2019 living wage rate. I can tell you that last year here in Niagara, we had our living wage hourly rate, which was $19.80. And this year in 2023, 2024, it is $20.35. So it is an increase. And I'm sure there was an increase between 2019 and 2020 as well. But that's kind of what we're looking at right now.
Yeah. So I think that's a good indicator, actually, to saying like we really see it and we see the change in this. But a living wage is just a living wage, and one depends on the businesses and organizations to put it in place and to extend it, really. And I was wondering if I could pass it on to both our employers who are with us today, both who have made the decision that it was very important for them to becoming a living wage employer. Maybe Fred, I'll start out with you. Can you let us know why this was important to you?
Yeah, the reason that it was important for us was, well, we were an early adopter of living wage. I believe we're the 9th living wage employer in Niagara. The challenge we've had is the positions that we've typically had here at our business are highly physical and very strenuous general labor positions requiring very little skill. And so the people that typically occupy these positions were generally struggling to make ends meet. And we saw the need in our workforce. And so adopting living wage was, from a social, moral perspective, was easy for us to acknowledge that we needed to be at that level. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ima, but it takes 2 people earning a living wage to be able to fulfill the requirements of a household. So, we always looked at most of our employees, they're one half of a relationship working to support a household. And our wages were below living wage. So we chose to adopt for that reason, just to give people the ability to live in the communities they worked in.
Thank you very much, Fred. And then your business is that of a restaurant and health services, very different from Fred's, who's in the manufacturing sector more. What were your reasons for adopting it and implementing it?
At the time, it was in about 2019, I was growing one company, that was the clinic. We were growing pretty quick. And then I was starting another one, and that was Dispatch. So at that time, the conversation of living wage was really resonating for all of the reasons that have already been mentioned. The living wage network at the time, now United Way, was really doing some good promotional work and getting the word out in the community. And so for me at the time, it seemed like a no-brainer. At Niagara Eye Care Center, we wanted to take every opportunity to build a team that enjoys their work, feels supported, and can see career stability. And paying them well is a big part of achieving that. At Dispatch, I decided to go into business with two really amazing people and co-founders, and the three of us shared that vision and at the time we felt like we were trailblazing, at least for hospitality. At the time, I think it was mentioned in your intro, Dispatch was, I think, the first restaurant in Ontario that was a living wage employer. And that meant a lot for us. We were very proud of that then. We're still proud of it now. And on a side note, to be able to do that as a non-tipping restaurant is, I think, also quite notable. And now we're approaching sort of HR. So anyway, two completely different businesses in completely different sectors. But I think the principle of valuing your staff remains the same. If you value your staff, they will value their work, and it all kind of comes back full circle in my view. Happy staff provide better quality care for our patients at Niagara Eye Care Center, and I think we're doing a great job there. I think it's a world-class facility and operation. And in the hospitality, if you've ever been to Dispatch, then you know what it offers. In terms of the quality of offerings, the attentive service, and the vibe. I just feel like you can build a great business if you have the right team and value them and their work, and at least starting having a living wage policy is part of that.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you're saying, because we are showing the value of the employee in the wages that we offer, in the environment that we offer, and the benefits that we put together as we're bringing a team together. And then Fred had mentioned that he was looking at employee retention. He said that was really critical to them as being also one of the considerations. Now you have looked at restaurant and health services. You have looked in both areas of it. Has it contributed to employee retention? Has it added to helped you when it comes to hiring or overall productivity? And I'm not sure if some of those things are easy to measure, but usually employee retention and hiring can be measured. Has the living wage helped you out for your businesses?
I think so, without question. I think, if you kind of look back, these two sectors in healthcare and hospitality probably had the highest labor shift because of the pandemic. Across Canada, I think something like 200,000, 250,000 people left hospitality during the pandemic for obvious reasons in Canada. I think to be able to retain them, support our team members and their families through the pandemic was important. And I'm glad that we found a way to manage that. I think during the pandemic, it was a shakedown in every sector nearly, but particularly hospitality and healthcare, of course. At Niagara Eye Care Center, I can say that we have had remarkably little turnover at the office over the years compared to most offices and medical centers. And I hear that, with colleagues in the community always, in large groups, people are asking for advice. Hey, I need somebody, somebody has, technician for hire, where, like these things are happening, and knock on wood, we were okay from an HR point of view, in a time of tremendous stress. With Dispatch, even through the pandemic, but then of course more recently with some major recent changes, we were still able to retain and also attract really great team members who have serious chops, in the kitchen, behind the bar, on the floor, and so what we've been able to do is to continue to be a really great spot, like a thriving business, to get people to come in with consistency. You need the staff to be able to provide that, and so I do think having a living wage policy has impacted retention, but you have to acquire the talent in the first place, and I know that it's definitely enabled that. You find the best talent, you offer them a good paying job, and keep them and build around them. And I think it all kind of leads to the next. And I think I'm learning that through experience here.
Yeah, no, makes total sense. And I think you're absolutely right. We're nothing without the team that is by our side to actually enable us to move our actualize the strategies that we have put in place and reach the goals that we want to achieve. Fred, you had also talked about employee retention, so I wanted to bring it back to you. You being more on the manufacturing side of it, has it assisted you with employee retention, hiring, overall productivity?
Yeah, the being living wage certified definitely added our ability to attract talent and employees to our organization. Also raising, so during COVID or with COVID, our workforce doubled, and we've been able to maintain that number of employees. And we're putting automation in now to increase our productivity with the team that we do have. Employing a lot of general laborers in a entry-level position, if you will, allows now with the living wage a tier of wage increases or wages. So as people work through our organization and as they increase in skill and experience and abilities, we're now able to pay, most of our employees are paid well above living wage, and living wage is the entry point for people to come into our organization. We still have a fair amount of turnover because there is a limited amount of opportunity to get promoted within the organization. There are opportunities to get promoted, but obviously our workforce is still largely a workforce that requires, hard, heavy labor. And so keeping people in those positions and honoring them with fair pay is a challenge that we've overcome with the living wage, adopting living wage at our company. I just want to shout out to Anand there. Never heard of your restaurant, but I'm going to have to try it out.
You do have to try it out. It's very good. So I might bring it back to you, but it's partially driven by Adnan's reference to the restaurant business too. So not all restaurants, but the majority of restaurants also have gratuities. And there has been a question that had been submitted from one of our attendees, and that is around how are gratuities accounted for in a living wage calculation. And so I know that not all restaurants deal with it the same way, but I was wondering if you could give us your input on it. And then Adnan, if you wanted to add anything to it, that would be appreciated too. But maybe I'll start out with you, Aima.
Perfect. So when a restaurant or a place of business that does accept tips and gratuity, we actually don't take that into account when it comes to that living wage calculation. The reason for that is we are solely focused on that guaranteed kind of predictable income for the employee. They need to know what they're going to be taking home based on the hours that they're working. I did see in the chat that somebody asked about how many hours per week we're talking about when we say living wage. So it is 35 hours per week. So we don't take into account the gratuity. We want folks to know that we're solely focused on that hourly wage. If the restaurant continues to accept gratuity and distribute that with their employees, that is perfectly fine. But if that is something that they're not wanting to do moving forward, that is also okay. But we don't take into account the gratuity. We want to focus on the predictable income, what folks can expect, what they're taking home.
Yeah, that makes sense actually. Can I now, maybe I'm going to shift it back to our two employers. And this is a question that has come forward by a high number of people. And they're asking, how does this policy or this direction apply to part-time and temporary workers? Does accommodating them pose any challenges for you, sometimes as an employer at the same time? And maybe if I start out with you, Fred, on this one, and then pass it on to Adnan, just of an input, say like, how do you deal with part-time and or some of your temporary workers or contract workers differently than you do with full-time?
So specifically to our organization, we don't have very many part-time employees, so it's not challenging to pay our part-time employees living wage. In regards to contract or temporary workers, we do have a number of people that come to us seasonally and through employment agencies, and they are paid living wage by the organization that they're employed by, and we pay an additional fee because we have to guarantee that they make living wage. So obviously, if they're going to make living wage, the organization that we're hiring them from is going to mark up their wages accordingly with the overhead that they experience, and we pay, a higher rate than we typically would, or that we could find cheaper temporary labor, but it's a choice that we make not to.
That helps so many people who are on this call right now, because this question has come up a number of times. And so I really appreciate your perspective of it, and also understanding that there's some room of interpretation and application that stays with the employer at this time. And what about you when it comes to your part-time staff or occasional workers?
Mm-hmm. Not again, similar, not as relevant, at least for the businesses that I'm involved with. There generally we have full-time workers, but I think in principle, the entry point for the wage is the living wage, and we just have that as principle. So, even if there were at time, part-time opportunities for people, that's where we would be starting the conversation of compensation. So, I think that it's not different, whether you're full-time or part-time. It wouldn't be if we had more part-time workers, put it that way.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, the majority of organizations in Niagara that are considering it might not currently be on a living wage, or not be anywhere close to it. And so one of the questions that has been asked is, what challenges did your organization face when transitioning to a living wage policy? And how did you overcome it? So this is, I think, a key question, because I would assume that there might be like a snowball effect that it had. You can apply it to some of the entry level at the beginning, but how did it impact other people at the same time? And Adnan, maybe if I start out with you, and then I'll pass it on to Fred as well.
In terms of challenges, it wasn't really a huge challenge to implement this at Niagara Eye Care Center, because that we just decided that that's what we're going to do. And also, the reality is it's a very stable business. There is obviously no shortage of work. If you have been to Niagara Eye Care Center to see one of the specialists there, you know how busy we are all the time. And so that's it was easier to implement there. With dispatch, this is different, right? Hospitality, to be doing this in the nature of that business is really, I think, an interesting conversation. There's a lot to say about that. I know this isn't a session on that, but with dispatch, we started our business with that policy. So that was the sort of how we decided we're going to build the business. And so we kind of worked around that foundational principle in terms of where you set your price points, and how you plan the business model, how you promote, and making sure that you're hitting your targets. In terms of a transition, if you're transitioning, I can say that I'm involved with another restaurant as well in Toronto called Beast Pizza, and so shout out to Beast. But when I got involved, we transitioned over to also being a living wage employer, also no tip restaurant, and there's a huge challenge for that in hospitality. With Beast, we did that during the pandemic as well. When I got involved, it wasn't an easy transition as a restaurant, and even still, it's a really tough industry to succeed in already. But once we made that commitment, we made the adjustments in strategy and just committed to make it all work. I would say that again, kind of one of the earlier things I was saying, if you approach a business that way in hospitality, you definitely can attract good talent, retain the talent. And, if you haven't been to Beast Pizza, just shout out, it's a top-notch spot. I think it's the best pizza in Toronto too. And I'm not biased. But what I'm saying is that, because of the approach you take to HR, we've held on to and attracted amazing people to be part of a very high-functioning teams. So, there definitely is, you have to be a bit business savvy. You may have to make some adjustments, and look at where you're kind of cutting costs. But, hospitality is unique because a lot of times, because of this, and that whole sector is changing through the pandemic and also in the post-pandemic era with the economy. A lot of times some of this has to get passed down to patrons, but that's just the nature of the industry. Costs are going up. People are demanding more in terms of compensation, which is fair. And so, I think the reality is that, if we want to live in a society where everybody is supported at a minimum sort of standard, then certain things are reflected, like the cost of certain things and certain luxuries, that kind of call into disposable income. It has to come from there, because I think that's the only way that everybody kind of rises up.
Yeah, it does make sense. I'm going to, Fred, ask you maybe a slightly different question, but I was wondering, and this has come forward as well, is that has this impacted your reputation or your relationships with customers or suppliers? When you put it in place, did you become loud about it and saying, this is who we are, this is what we stand for? Were there some pushbacks from individuals, and how did your partners, your suppliers, and everyone else react to it?
So I think the biggest compliment to us is that there's been a lot of people that we work with that have copied our approach and have also initiated being living wage employers, and we're proud of that, and we are happy to see it, whether they're competitors in our sphere or they're partners that we work with. We're happy to see that the people that are working for them are being compensated fairly and correctly, and at a level that they can live in the community that they work in. When we brought in the living wage, we did have a number of challenges with that, because we had a group of employees at that point that were underperforming. And so when we put in living wage, it was a significant increase in the starting rate here. And so at that point, there were people that we didn't believe were performing at the level of compensation that we were required to pay with living wage. And so that was a challenge that we had to work through. And we had to make those people aware of that, say, hey, your performance is not reflective of where we need to be able to afford to be a living wage supplier or company business. And we had to make some changes in our employment. Now, that being said, we've saved money and retained and managed to reduce the turnover since we implemented living wage, because people are being paid more, and we are hiring more talented people that are more committed to us because of our commitment to them. So, there is a reciprocation that does happen with that commitment. And there might be some pains in the onboarding process, but the reward is greater than the pains.
Yep.
And that's the thing people got to take away from this is, you got to treat people fairly. And when you treat people fairly, they're going to treat you the way you treat them.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm going to come back to you, because Adnan had mentioned a little bit about the pressures, the inflationary pressures that we have. And one of the questions that people have is the cost of living. Is it possible that a living wage could contribute to inflationary pressures? That's been one of the questions, saying that, for instance, if increasing wages in an area without increasing, for example, the housing supply, could at least lead to increased rents. What are we looking at? Would it add to these pressures that so many of us are feeling right now?
That's a really good question, and I feel like it comes up a lot. I'm going to preface my answer by saying I'm not an economist, so I'm going to speak to kind of the living wage side of things and in the best ability that I can, but I'm not an economist. I'll just preface that. So when we talk about inflationary pressures, we know that the cost of living is rising constantly, but costs rise all the time without workers receiving any pay increase. Wages are just one of the many factors that contribute to the cost of an item. In addition to that, living wage policies cover only a small percentage of the labor force. There's actually a really cool study that was done by University of Washington on the minimum wage. So when Seattle committed to raise their minimum wage to $15 an hour, researchers began studying kind of the consumer price for goods. They found that the increase in minimum wage actually had no impact on the prices of goods. That costs went up by the same amount in Seattle as they did in the surrounding areas and communities. So they didn't see that raise to their minimum wage reflect in the inflationary pressures or the things that they saw in surrounding communities. It was about the same. Another thing, or another example that's actually a little closer to home, is when Ontario increased their minimum wage. So more than 1 million Ontario workers actually got a pay raise when we increased it from $11.60 an hour to $14 an hour. And people predicted that, maybe we would see a fall in employment rates. And that's not what happened. We actually saw a rise in employment rates. So there was a little bit of fear there. But there was no abnormal increase in consumer price index at that time either. You did mention specifically about housing, so I want to address that in a way that I think is most authentic. The housing crisis is a complex problem with many factors, but I think paying people what they need to make ends meet isn't one of them. Paying people enough to pay their bills is not one of those complex factors that we're dealing with when we're looking at the housing crisis, especially here in Ontario.
I'm fully actually agree with you. It is an affordability question, and it's a supply question, and the demand is significantly more complex than that. You had mentioned the Ontario government and the minimum wage. And one of the things that we hear from our members, that we hear from businesses, is they always are looking for some level of predictability because payroll is a big element in someone's business. It's huge. And people in businesses are always saying, or employers in business are saying, let us know what to expect. Do it on a regular basis. Don't do it 3 times a year or something like this. Every year, give us a sense what the percentage is in advance of it, because most of us and most organizations put strategic plans in place that are in place for 3 years, 5-year plans. And so this is a huge component to it. Could you give attendees a sense of when the living wage is being announced is it being announced on an annual basis? If significant things happen during the course of the year, does the living wage fluctuate during that year? Can you give people some sense of understanding of it?
Yeah, of course. So our living wage is updated every year. So that update usually comes around October time. So there wouldn't be kind of an announcement in the middle of the year before October that the living wage is changing. It's always been in October, and it'll continue to remain that way. So the data and the research that's being collected and done is done throughout the year, and then we're able to announce it at that time.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And now, do you give people that are living wage employers a sense during the course of the year of what to expect? So maybe, or have we historically seen jumps higher one year from one year to the other than in previous ones, so that people have a sense, especially for those ones that are building a multi-year business model?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ontario Living Wage does reach out to our employers and kind of give them a little bit of a heads up when the wage is being announced, just so they can kind of get their ducks in a row and figure out what their plan is going forward. And employers do have a 6-month window in which they can kind of assess where they're headed, and if the living wage is something that they can continue their commitment to. That's the time frame that they would use to figure that out. There have been employers that have chosen to opt out for the year and are hoping to return in the following year, but they are given that freedom to kind of figure out where they're at and how they'd like to move forward with their commitment, because it is voluntary.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's appreciated. I'm turning back to Fred and Anan. This is the question of one of our attendees today, and they're asking, or they're wondering if either one of you can share any feedback that you might have received or heard directly from employees or accounts of tangible experiences and impact of receiving the living wage. So when you look back, in some cases, Anna, you said you had it in place since 2019. Fred, you were early adopter of the program as well. So this could now have had already an impact on individuals. And someone is saying, any stories you can tell us, any experiences where you kind of felt like this has made a change? And it's something that maybe you can also then share with your team, or that you're just aware of, and something that probably also supports you having made that choice. And maybe I'm going to start out with you, Fred, and then move over to you, Adnan, if that works.
Sure. If I can speak to that, we've had we've had numerous experiences, 2 that are sort of prominent. I touched on the one. We have a local competitor that we compete with in our, business. I think that's pretty normal. And after we adopted living wage and we started advertising that, they also chose to adopt living wage, and I'm happy to see that. And it levels the playing field from a cost of employment perspective. Although I prefer if all of you would buy your pallets off of us. The second was we have some employees, and significant other, spouse, whatever their relationship is. They're working. We've had a number of people working for us, and because we're living wage employers, and the employment of their spouse or significant other was not living wage, they brought their spouse or partner into a position here to work with us. So they're both working for us so that they can afford to live in the community that they work in. So that has happened on a number of occasions, and it's been beneficial. It does pose some other challenges, but we work through those challenges. So it's good to see when people are, coming here because of that and recognizing the value that it does have, and then bringing, their friends and family into work with us. Obviously, that builds a community in our organization as well that goes beyond just paying a living wage.
And Freddie making, I think, an excellent point in it is like that, you're attracting individuals that probably would have never considered maybe that as being a career choice of theirs. But the second point, and you've made it earlier as well, is saying that often a household has it's a two earning household, and the impact that one individual has of what their earning is on the other, and the pressure that could actually be experienced because of it. And that much of this concept is often dependent on having two individuals earning this amount of money or a living wage. So I really appreciate that. And then any experiences, as one of our attendees here had asked, where you feel like that kind of reiterated or strengthened your commitment to the living wage?
Sure. I mean, I think Fred was saying some stuff before about, what it meant in the community at that time. I think early days, kind of taking that leap, inspired other businesses to follow suit. Initially, we found ourselves maybe kind of collaborating and supporting other like-minded businesses to sort of raise up the sort of the business community at large. But then it sort of permeated, and I think there's energy that's moving. So that's been obviously a positive impact of deciding to kind of go down this route as an employer. From an employee point of view, again, we've talked about sort of like attracting good talent, keeping them, loyalty, building the business together around them. But specific things like, in the restaurants early days, I mean, it may be difficult now, but like, some of our staff were applying for mortgages on a restaurant salary. And, and this was before, when there was a server's minimum wage, which was, you can't do anything on that. And so that kind of stuck out to me, that like that server in a restaurant had enough consistent income to sort of be able to live a normal life, in Toronto or in Niagara, and apply for a mortgage. And I thought that actually made something, made it sort of click for me. That was the one thing. We have employees in both sort of sectors that also don't have their permanent status locally, and having support for a new family, through employment in one of my businesses, also kind of gives us sort of a confirmation that we're on the right track. And that's led them to stay. They've sort of been able to apply for a status, and they're building their lives in Canada with the help because of they're employed in a business that chooses to do this. And I think those two kind of stories really stick out for me.
The excellent stories, and they make it real. And I wanted to, because I'm not sure if everyone is able to see the chat, and especially those individuals who are tuning in later will not be able to see it, but there is one of our attendees, and I just wanted to read it, what the individual said. And they said, as an employee of a living wage business, it is hard to contextualize the emotional impact of the kind of financial security a living wage has. It certainly spills over into my day-to-day work, and it gives me pride to be part of the business. I take the time to explain the model to customers, and it's also very well received on that end. And that comes from the first person, so it's wonderful. So I thank you very much. I thanks go to Jake for actually sharing that in the chat. And if anyone else has similar experiences, we'd love to see your messages in the chat as well. I'm bringing it back to you, and that's again in getting a more wholesome understanding of the living wage. And for example, an organization that utilizes many suppliers, partners, contractors, but maybe those individuals working for those organizations might not be on a living wage. How does that affect certification when it comes to it?
It's a good question. I think Fred kind of touched on it a little bit earlier in one of his answers. But when you are employing individuals that are on a contract, so the simplest example I could use is, let's say you have a business and there's someone who comes in the evening, kind of does a check of the area. Maybe they do a cleanup, or they're responsible for shredding things, things like that. If they are employed by a third-party contractor, sometimes what employers will choose to do is that they kind of take a look at the contract that they have existing with that third-party contractor, figure out what is the wage that that individual is being paid from that employer, and see if there's a way that they can top up that wage in order to bring them up to the living wage, whatever that may be. So that could be a top of $2 or $3 per hour, or perhaps, you know, that kind of inspires them to take on that living wage journey, and maybe that's something that they want to explore. But it would just be a process of reviewing their current contract, and when the time comes to renew that, they can choose to top up the wages so that they're bringing that individual to a living wage.
To be officially certified, does one need to ensure that all suppliers and contractors are at a living wage as well? Or can one accept that they don't?
That's a good question. So our living wage program right now has 3 tiers that it sort of follows. We have the supporter tier, we have the leader tier, we have the champion tier. Obviously, the hope is that employers, when they're taking on the living wage certification, when they're taking on that commitment, that they're striving towards getting to that champion level. And that champion level is all full-time staff, all part-time staff, all contract third-party workers are all included in that living wage. But not all employers start off at that champion level. They might start off as a supporter or a leader. So maybe they're just addressing full-time at first, and they transition into addressing part-time and full-time. And then the hope is that eventually they will be able to bring all of their employees, whether they're from a contracted employer or if they're working in the building every day. That is the hope, but we do have that tiered system that allows employers some flexibility in figuring out how they're going to make those changes, and so they don't feel rushed into the process of making that full champion commitment right away.
Yeah, that makes full sense. And while I have your attention right now, I have one more question, and I think you might maybe give us your perspective on this one too. And that is around EDI or DEI, however people say, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Many organizations are speaking to it. Many organizations have plans and initiatives in place. Can you speak to how a living wage could fit into a diversity, equity, inclusion plan, Ima?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I think about living wage, the great thing about having this conversation is that when we're having the conversation of living wage, we are already taking a DEI lens. When we think about individuals who are typically earning minimum wage or who are at the bottom of our workforce, unfortunately, it's our most underrepresented populations. It's our most vulnerable populations and individuals and families in those sectors that are working low wage jobs, that are in those precarious roles, who might not have good grasp of the income that they're going to be guaranteed over the next month or the next week. So we're already talking about individuals who are on the bottom of the workforce. So I think inherently it is already a DEI conversation. We're already talking about improving the lives of those individuals who are at the bottom of the workforce, making really, really hard decisions every day. Income right now is one of the only tools we have to lift people out of poverty. I wanted to share some information from the National Advisory Council on Poverty for 2023. They tell us that women, newcomers, single parents are some of the individuals that are more likely to be earning low wages. And so by adopting a living wage, we're already addressing the needs of some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. Right now in Niagara, with our living wage program, we have about 3,000 plus employees that are earning a living wage through that program. time, these are individuals who may otherwise have been earning minimum wage and who are at a greater risk of experiencing poverty. So I love this question, and it's very near and dear to my heart. But when we talk about living wage, we are already having a DEI conversation.
I agree with you too. There is one more question that has come in, and then I'm going to move back to Fred and Adnan. But there's an individual with us today. They manage a winery in Naga-on-the-Lake, and if they were to start paying a living wage, but in the off season cannot guarantee hours to our staff, and that has been, or to their staff, which is often the case. Does this still count as being certified as a living wage employer, even though they would not meet the hour per week requirements in the off season? And we have a lot of, when we take a look at NIGA, we have a lot of seasonal businesses that are going to be impacted by it. And this is one of those questions. It's a very good question.
That's a really good question. So we actually don't have a minimum requirement of 35 hours a week. When I said 35 hours a week before, that was kind of to show that if an individual is earning $20.35 an hour and they worked 35 hours a week, that is the calculation that we use for living wage. But of course, our employers do have full-time employees, they have part-time employees. As long as those part-time employees are earning the $20.35 an hour, they're earning that living wage, they would still be considered a living wage employer. So that the weekly hours that are needed to work are actually for our calculations. When we tell individuals that this is what you need to earn for this many hours a week, this is the living wage, but that's not a requirement for the employers that they need to hire everybody at 35 hours a week. Hopefully that answers your question. If you have more questions about it, feel free to reach out to me privately and we can have that conversation. But that would not exclude any employer from becoming a living wage employer because they have part-time casual employees.
That makes sense. Fred, I'm going to come back to you. You had mentioned a couple of times actually that some of your competitors, or you had mentioned that one of your competitors had also implemented a living wage right after or shortly after you had implemented it. So maybe it's not your competitor that you would like to give some advice to, but if another organization would come to you, totally not part of your field, what advice would you give to other organizations considering becoming a living wage employer?
I'm going to say this to all people, whether they're my competitors or not, because I think it's a valuable consideration for all employers. We are in a specter of employment where we employ people in very intensive labor positions, and there's a lot of different fields that do this. We happen to be in manufacturing, but when we raise the bar with our minimum rate of pay to our employees by adopting living wage, we raise the bar of expectation for our employees as well. And we reduce the amount of turnover we used to experience. So typically in these jobs that, typically the people we employed, we would have a higher rate of turnover because we had a lower expectation. And that lower expectation led to, people leaving because we weren't paying them adequately, or people not performing to our expectations. And that also provides insecurity to people. So paying more gives people more security, gives us the ability to reduce turnover, increase retention. Turnover is expensive from an employment perspective. Hiring and training is expensive. Doesn't matter, whether you're in our field or not. And so my encouragement to everybody is, look at it as a way to improve your business, because it will increase your profitability if you focus on the right activities with your employment. So at the end of the day, it was a journey to get here, but it has made us a more profitable company, and it has improved the lives of all of the people that work for us.
And Fred, on that note, because you're mentioning it was a journey, from the time you first looked at it until you implemented it, how long of a time frame did you give yourself in making it a reality within your organization?
I don't know how long we struggled with it, if you will. I'm going to say that it was probably between a half a year and a year. It might have been longer, but we realized in our business at that point, realizing that there was living wage, that we needed to pay our employees more to attract, hire, and retain people that wanted to stay in the positions that we were offering. And living wage was the mechanism that allowed us to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then over to you. Has anyone ever criticized you for embracing living wage? I'm looking, especially when I look at the restaurant or accommodation and food services industry. There's probably, I'm making this assumption here, Ima, you might want to correct me, but maybe that it's harder for that sector that relies and has a model that so heavily relies on gratuities and others. Has anyone ever been critical of it, that you embraced it? Have you ever heard criticism from employees even that maybe have not, where the concept was different than what they were used to?
Right. I don't think I've ever heard any criticisms about this. It doesn't, that'd just be highly unlikely if somebody's like, oh, you should pay your staff less. That's just not, it's just not an approach, like of sound sort of business development. But and there's never been, at least in the office, I mean, staff are well supported, and we have great retention, all the things that we've talked about, the benefits of being a living wage employer at the office. Hospitality is profoundly different. Because it's just a completely it's a completely different sector, and it's tough. It's very competitive. Margins are notoriously low, and then there's tremendous pressure over the last few years with the pandemic, what hospitality went through, and then now this post-pandemic sort of phase that we're in, with the rising cost of food and labor, and and it's not in generally in hospitality, like in Canada, I think something like 50% of restaurants are still operating either at a loss or barely breaking even. So to try to manage this, I think you'll have some people, some staff I remember in hospitality that would have complained, like, no, we can't get rid of tipping. Because it really contributes to the income. But then on the flip side, our approach was, well, then the business should be paying the staff well. We shouldn't rely on sort of patrons to come in and then decide sort of kind of fill in the blanks for what's a fair sort of compensation for the staff. So it was controversial at the time. There is controversial, some mixed sort of thoughts, depending on if you're like a senior server working in a high-end restaurant that can cherry pick Fridays and Saturdays, in its tipping model, like that changes the game. But not everybody has that kind of access. I think overall, though, for the employees that we've retained, for other businesses that have adopted this model, specifically in hospitality, there aren't that many, but hopefully it's starting. It is difficult, but you'll never hear bad things from the staff. But there may be people that are in different types of businesses that think that there's a better way. But, I think the best way is to, at minimum, ensure that staff are all supported equally to sort of, at a minimum sort of level, to allow them to live a good life, a well-supported life. So there haven't been really any meaningful negative impacts from the community, or from people talking about what we're doing. So I can just say that, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I think that helps everyone listening here too, is to seeing like what to anticipate, how long will it take me, how much time should I give myself to exploring it. I'm conscious of the time, but there's one really interesting question. Well, all questions are interesting, but there's one we haven't gotten to. So I'm going to ask this last one here, is why do some living wage employers start at a lower rate than 2035? And in many cases, those individuals have been told that the employer at the same time offers a very good benefit package, which benefits are critical to individuals at any time, and therefore they offer a lower rate. And Ima, if I can ask you to give me perspective of how's the rate impacted by other, because compensation is broad, it's not just the salary you give, but how is it impacted by a benefit package?
That's a really good question. And my apologies for not addressing it earlier when you asked about the costs that we consider when coming up with that living wage. In that cost breakdown is also non-OHIP covered medical expenses. So that could be a contribution to dental, it could be life insurance, things like that. So when a business is taking on the living wage journey and they sit down and meet with Ontario Living Wage, we actually do have a calculator that we use to kind of assess what is a contribution that the employee is making towards their benefits, what is the contribution the employer is making to the benefits package. And there's a way that we work out those numbers so that it's reflective of those benefits, because it wouldn't be directly coming out of the employee's pocket, that they wouldn't be contributing that amount that we've set for that region and what that contribution would be. So there is some differences sometimes with employers that are offering a very substantial benefits package. You might notice that their rate is lower, but that's because we've adjusted for that cost.
Thank you very much. And my thanks to all three of you, Adnan, I'm Fred, for being actually with us. This has been an extraordinary conversation and a dialogue, and I hope, it is my sincerest hope, with actually really allowing and giving our employers and organizations more of an opportunity to explore a living wage as being fundamental to their business and how they're moving their business forward. To all of our participants, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your questions and for your comments that we've seen. And by the looks of it, I think we got to all the questions that were being asked. And as always, my thanks to Living Wage Niagara for all that you do and for being also bringing us together here and to Penn Financial as well. So thank you. This was an important topic. It is an important topic as we're moving forward in Niagara to create the economic and social stability that we want to see. So my heartfelt thanks to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.